Welcome to Voices for Change. I'm Greg Lee. We have several topics to discuss on today's show, including AAPI Heritage Month, but we will not and we cannot ignore our nation is in mourning. The community of Uvalde, Texas, grief-stricken and in shock as our country marks another school shooting. 19 children and 2 teachers in a single classroom shot and killed by a gunman at Robb Elementary School. Let me say that again. 19 children and 2 adults. The deadliest school shooting since 20 children and 6 educators were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary a decade ago. The anguished families of the victims beginning to share photos and stories of these 4th graders, how they loved to smile, loved throwing the football, a student who just made the honor roll, a 10-year-old who loved to dance. And what about the children forever traumatized by the shooting at the place where they came to learn? There are no words to describe this moment. And as lawmakers debate the best way to respond, the undeniable fact is this is not okay. Here's how Warriors coach Steve Kerr put it.
In the last 10 days, we've had elderly black people killed in a supermarket in Buffalo. We've had Asian churchgoers killed in Southern California. And now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something? I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm so tired of I'm tired of the moments of silence. Enough.
This week, parents all over the country processing this horrific crime and trying to find ways to check in with their own kids. As these difficult conversations are had, we spoke to Dr. Elizabeth Reicher, child and adolescent psychologist at Stanford Children's Health. She shares why just being there is the key. What is the most important message for parents, and what is most important for them to do with their kids at a time when there's so much bad news out there?
It's a great question. It's a difficult one. It can definitely depend on several different factors. I think it's important that we think about the age of your child and of course the temperament of one's child, and then their prior experiences. And children in these sorts of moments are going to respond and react in different ways. And as parents, we want to be as supportive as possible. We want to understand that our children are going to have different reactions. Even when we as a parent are having our own reactions and difficulties to hearing the news, I think it's important to remember that our children react to the way our children react to what they see in the news is going to be strongly influenced by how we react and respond. So, they turn to us for that comfort and for that help. And so it's really essential that as parents, we're checking in with ourselves first and doing what we need to be doing to take care of ourselves so that we can be really calm and grounded in conversations that we're having with our children about these difficult topics.
I know that trauma can sometimes elicit silence and that kids may not want to talk about these things. So are there questions that should be asked to perhaps check up on a kid?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's essential. It's so important that as parents, we find time for these conversations to check in with our children about what's happening on the news. And that can be at times when you eat together or just sit together in the after school hours or evenings or on weekends. We definitely want to try to avoid bedtime as a time to check in on these things, and keep bedtime as really a space for rest and relaxation. But we can start conversations like this by asking our children what they already know. A lot of children, a lot of teens are going to have heard about an event like this from the media or from their friends, and we want to check in, understand what they've already heard, and listen carefully as their child explains. We want to listen for misinformation. We want to listen for misconceptions. We want to listen for potential underlying fears or concerns that they're having. If our child is expressing some inaccurate information or misconception about what has occurred, this is an opportunity for us as the parent to provide correct information in a very simple, clear, appropriate language. Our kids, they may not want to talk about it, but they also may want to talk about it. And they may have some really difficult questions about what's happened. For instance, a really common question that you might that you might get from your child is if something like this, if a school shooting is possible, that it could happen at their school. And really, in moments like this, what our children are probably really trying to get at is whether it's likely, right? The concern about reoccurrence of an event like this is not just an issue for us as parents, of course, that we think about, but for children and teens alike. So, it's important that we can discuss the likelihood of risk, but it's also really our child is asking us if they're safe. And so this can be an opportunity for you to review plans that your family might have for keeping safe, in the event of any sort of crisis situation, and also reviewing plans that your child's school has about safety. Having question and answer talks gives your child an opportunity to get that ongoing support from you as their parent.
The nation had barely caught its breath from a series of recent tragedies. 10 days before the Texas school shooting, a mass shooting at a Buffalo, New York supermarket. A gunman walked into the Tops Friendly Market, a grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood. He shot 13 victims, killing 10 black shoppers and workers. After the gunman was taken into custody, investigators found a manifesto full of racist views, making it clear he planned to kill black people. In Dallas, federal officials are investigating a series of attacks on Asian-run businesses as potential hate crimes. With a rise in hate crimes, San Jose State's Dr. Sean Fletcher discusses the root of the issue. Doc, when we look back at what occurred in Buffalo about a week and a half ago, what is your reaction to what was a racist attack?
That is more of the same. That we may take a couple steps forward, but we still take many, many steps back when it comes to not only race relations in this country, but how we continue to stoke and flame the fans of racism, of fear, of pitting communities against one another. When I look at individuals who do such heinous crimes in the way that they do, it's not only about mental well-being. Yes, that's a part of it. But if I sit and think through and I peel back the layers of what can lead a person to do such things, these are learned behaviors. Short of a significant mental health disorder, these are learned behaviors that drive individuals to do what they do in mass, like he did, and like these shooters continue to do. Hatred is learned. Bigotry is learned. Feeling as though it's a zero-sum game, me versus you. Feeling as though I'm being replaced in this society, and individuals are being given as the face of replacement. Black and brown faces, Asian-American faces, LGBTQ plus are the faces, have become the faces politically of this whole replacement notion. And then on top of that, when you continue to stoke that paranoia and that deep-rooted hatred and bigotry, and now you then attach that to the lack of mental wellness and healthcare options for individuals, it takes 10 days to get a handgun if you have a clean background, and it is significantly more difficult for you to get a therapy session. I've been there. There's a responsibility in terms of what are we telling and spreading to the masses that they go and adopt and will continue to perpetuate and socialize, and then they will socialize that to those around them who are very impressionable, and they will continue to move forward with a poisonous, toxic ideology that, again, does not just stay in their mind. It has a clear and present face that is being put on it at every level in our society, to where now hatred and bigotry and violence has a face. We put a face on it. And it doesn't matter as we continue to see what age and what level of responsibility that face has. These children down in Texas, Black and brown faces. These individuals in Buffalo in a grocery store, Black faces. Hatred in this country is not just staying with an ideology, it has a face, and that's dangerous. So yes, it has to be confronted on every single level. It has to be confronted at every single turn. And it's not just our official, well-known, recognized institutions like politics. It needs to be confronted at your dinner table when individuals are spewing toxicity that goes unchecked, that goes unconfronted, because it's the little conversations that can then turn into big catastrophes.
We wanted to create something that did help, that did reach back into the community in tangible and material ways.
A new program to support Asian business owners. Coming up, what drove the founder to step up during this AAPI Heritage Month. Stay with us. Welcome back. As we close out Asian-American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we are highlighting the work of the nonprofit Leading Asian Americans to Unite for Change, or LAUNCH. In a new study, they found 1/3 of Americans are unaware of the increase in attacks against Asian Americans. 29% of Asian Americans feel like they are completely accepted in American society, and 70% of Americans believe anti-Asian racism should be addressed. For more, I spoke to LAUNCH co-founder Norman Chen. Let me first ask you about this latest status index by LAUNCH. One thing that stood out to me is that 1/3 of Americans polled are unaware of increases of the attacks on Asian Americans. So what surprised you out of this, and what's causing some of these issues that we see?
Well, thanks for having me, Greg. It's really a pleasure. Yeah, it is shocking, if you will, that over the past 2 years, despite all the news about anti-Asian American sentiment, that still 1/3 of Americans are not aware of these attacks against our community. We ask people where they get their information from, and a lot of people do get it from news media. So for some reason, they're not catching the news, or news media actually, in some cases, as you know, have stopped reporting as much about anti-Asian American hate because it's been going on for so long. It's less of a novel story. We've heard that from reporters, less interest from their newsrooms in these topics. But it's really disappointing because the attacks have now over 11,000 over the past 2.5 years. Our communities live in fear. We know about the recent attacks in Dallas, and that community is very much in fear. I was in Oakland about a month ago. They closed down Chinatown there at 3 o'clock now because people are afraid to be out when it gets dark. And so the stores are closing at 3, the restaurants are closed in the evenings. So their businesses are severely affected.
To me, so much of this has to do with representation, not just representation in the media or in Hollywood, but across the board in C-suites, et cetera. How important is that piece to you?
Really, really important. We know that Asian Americans are seen as the model minority myth, right? And so people think, oh, they're successful, they must be well represented in senior leadership positions. And in fact, when we ask them in the status index how well represented Asian Americans are, basically about half of Americans think that Asian Americans are well represented at senior positions. We actually know that we're severely underrepresented. We're about 7% of the population, but in terms of power positions, senior positions in government and business, we only make up about 2.6% of the people. So severely underrepresented, and really important, right? It's really important for a variety of reasons. For Asian Americans, they don't have mentors they can look up to who are in those positions, who are championing for them. So it's hard for them to aspire and get to that level and break through that bamboo ceiling. For people in the community, if they don't see Asian Americans in leadership positions, our voice is less valued. It's less heard. And the other key data that we found is that Asian Americans among all communities are the least likely in the US to feel like we truly belong and are accepted in our country. That's partly because when we look at the media, we look at leaders, we don't see ourselves well represented. And in the media, in TV shows and movies, we're seen in very kind of unflattering ways, oftentimes very stereotypical ways, martial artists, gangsters, and prostitutes or sex workers. And so that affects the sense of self-identity for many Asian Americans.
How proud are you of the resiliency of our communities? And also looking forward, why is the message important that it endures beyond just the month of May, that this is a everyday thing?
For AAPI Heritage Month, the Asian American Foundation, where I am now, we are doing a special series called Heritage Heroes, where we're showcasing unsung Asian Americans who are doctors and nurses and farmers and first responders and teachers who every day oftentimes need to, worry about their own personal safety, yet they're contributing in such heroic ways to their communities, our country, and they're showing, again, tremendous resilience and bravery. So these are powerful stories.
Equity, influence, and economic opportunity. Those are the goals of a new program from Facebook's parent company, Meta. In part, Meta Prosper provides small businesses training in 6 languages. I spoke to founder Eric Toda about the program's goals. The message behind Meta Prosper is to empower, amplify, and celebrate. Talk about the significance of this during this AAPI Heritage Month.
I look at the significance of the launch of Meta Prosper as a step in the right direction that I would love to see many businesses make. I think if you look at last year, a lot of it was about amplification. A lot of it was about visibility, and that's still the case for sure. But one of the things that we wanted to do is take it one step further and say, okay, what are we uniquely capable of doing? And how do we deploy that into areas that are and continue to be affected disproportionately by xenophobia, by attacks, by racism? And so creating Meta Prosper, which is a new program designed by Meta to support Asian Pacific Islander small businesses, was an answer to what is the step, what is the next step in the right direction to support our community.
Eric, you and I have often talked about sort of the 2 pandemics here, the dual pandemics, that of COVID-19, but also that of racism and Asian attacks. So how will this help those small business owners get back on their feet?
If you speak to a small business owner today, they think they're invisible. They think they've been left for dead. And there's a stat that even 1 in 4 Asian Pacific Islander owned small businesses don't believe that they'll survive past this year because no one is talking to them. I mean, if you look at a lot of the content that does try to talk to them, it's all in English, right? And as you and I both know, in many cases, English is the second language. So that was the first step. How do we take so much of this content and translate it into 6 primary API languages? The second thing is, how do we work with great nonprofits like Gold House, for example, in their small business accelerator to amplify that up? How do we continue to build a coalition to support these businesses that honestly, they do believe they're not seen. They do believe, no one's helping them. And so in lieu of all of that, we wanted to create something that did help, that did reach back into the community in tangible and material ways.
Eric, you were on Capitol Hill last week advocating for the very things that have become your passion project. So what are the things that people can do beyond just the month of May to make sure that these communities and these businesses succeed and survive?
I think the first thing is to continue to keep the conversation alive. In many cases, the conversation just stops on May 30th, right? The conversation needs to continue, not just about the Asian Pacific American audience, but really minority audiences as a whole. I do think we do need to continue to push for material efforts to support minority-owned businesses. I do believe that we do need to continue to push legislators for tougher hate crime bills. And again, I think the bigger thing is to continue to support these businesses in material ways. Go and visit them. Go to Chinatowns. Frequent these mom and pop stores that are honestly struggling to survive. I look at it like this. It's that we have the opportunity right now as a community and as a general collection of communities to support each other. Because right now, more than ever, as the world slowly starts to come back, it's your opportunity to go visit these shops. It's your opportunity to go advocate on their behalf. And it's your opportunity, again, to continue to raise awareness about what's happening to them. Please follow us at Instagram.com/MetaProsper, Facebook.com/MetaProsper, and visit our website, Facebook.com/ProsperWithUs.
that is how we show that we belong and that we're individuals and that we're not a stereotype, is to share all of our beautiful specific stories.
Still to come, a staple of children's television takes another step towards inclusion. We'll introduce you to the woman behind the show's first Asian-American puppet. Welcome back to Voices for Change. History made on an establishment in American children's television. Sesame Street debuted the show's first Asian-American Muppet, a 7-year-old Korean-American named Jiyong. The woman behind her, Kathleen Kim, shared what this means to her.
You launched Jiyong on Sesame Street 6 months ago. What has been the response, especially from the Asian American community?
Oh my gosh, it's been overwhelmingly positive, but overwhelming in general. I think we're Asian Americans here, we're so not used to being visible and represented that to suddenly see a character, not just like a human actor or a cartoon, but like a physical Muppet, which is such an American institution, and to see a Korean kid with a hyphenated name on a 53-year-old American legacy show that a lot of us grew up on. I think it was like a big validation and a real surprise, it feels like, for a lot of Asian Americans.
What is important for you about developing who she is as part of her culture, but also as a Korean American?
Yeah, I mean, obviously she was created to be specifically Korean American, mostly because they already had a Korean American puppeteer and they knew that we could make her specific, and it was important for us to make her specifically of a culture and not try to paint her into this pan-Asian sort of, sort of generic character. But it's important for her to be as specific as possible. I don't think she wants to represent all Asian Americans or all Korean Americans. She represents herself, and her Korean heritage is an important part of who she is, but it's not the only thing that she is. And we want the young audience to get to know her as like a specific character. She's spunky, she loves rock and roll, she speaks her mind, she plays the electric guitar, and she skateboards. She's very brave, and she's a really good friend to everybody. And so we want her to come across as like a specific kid so that she's relatable. And her Korean American heritage should be a huge part of that. She's definitely very proud to share it with her friends. As we make room for API visibility in the last few years, and we're seeing books and movies, politicians and people in sport, I think in the 90s, there was that thing of like Joy Luck Club was the only movie that like represented us and our family dynamics. And then Crazy Rich Asians came, and that was like the only movie that year that had like Asian representation. But now what we're seeing with like this year, especially, we're seeing like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Turning Red. And like there is this feeling that we don't need to tell all of our story at once because this might be our only shot. We can tell our own specific individual stories. And honestly, that is how we show that we belong and that we're individuals and that we're not a stereotype, is to share all of our beautiful specific stories from our different cultures and from our different perspectives from person to person. Sesame Street from 1969, season 1, episode 1, they were groundbreaking and having an integrated human cast, to the point where they were banned from like 1 or 2 southern states from their public channels. And so this has always been their mission statement, is to make sure that like representation, inclusivity is like in their curriculum, to fold in like, disenfranchised like populations in the country. And they're continuing it. It's just evolved in a different way with like an Asian Muppet. Who knew that this would ever happen? But I hope that that's what kids get from it, is that like it used to be honkers and grouches and big birds and monsters and whatever. And now we're incorporating, Asian people, Black people, Spanish speaking bilingual people, that no matter who you are, where you come from, what language you speak at home, what holidays you celebrate with your family, that we all belong here. We can all be American.
A good message there. And we want to thank you for watching today and every month. As we say goodbye, a look at the faces of the 19 children and 2 teachers, the victims in Uvalde, Texas.